on digital awareness, and we want to share with everyone on how to be safe and conduct safe and secure digital transactions. This is also our contribution in creating awareness as part of Financial Literacy Week by Reserve Bank of India and Government of India. The idea and theme for the session, as per RBI, is Go Digital, Go Secure, and we want to bring in more people in the digital fold as an overarching objective. I have with me Mohit Gopal, Senior Vice President at PayU. And at PayU, he oversees strategic partnerships and manages multiple businesses, including omnichannel solutions, SMB, bill payments, and government vertical. His expertise in scaling businesses and diversifying the payments project suite as well. Mohit has earlier worked with IFC International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group, and had also worked with P&O Bulk Shipping London. Before joining PayU, he was an independent consultant rendering financial advisory services. Mohit holds a PGDM from IIM Ahmedabad and a master's degree in business law from National Law School, Bangalore. Thank you, Mohit, for joining us here. I'll dive in. Mohit, I want to first start by asking on the emerging digital landscape in recent times, and especially in the COVID times, and how COVID has been a disruptor in the digital landscape.
No, sure. I think, as I've said in the past as well, because of COVID, I think behavior has changed, right? People are increasingly working from home. And what we have seen is that, especially when you talk about security, right? People are spending more time digital. I recently just read this a report by Norton, which spoke on the Norton 2021 report on digital security. And it said that people across the world are spending more time online, and when they're spending more time online, identity theft has increased, worry has increased that they can be compromised in some shape or form. So definitely, there are more people spending time online. So more people have gone digital, spending longer time there, but they're also getting compromised at a greater rate, right? So I think that's the first largest, single largest thing which we have seen during this period. The other things which we have actually seen is that increasingly around the world, companies feel that while most people may move to a blended work from home sort of environment, hybrid work from home, wherein they're talking about both office and at home, but many companies also think that it is possible to indefinitely continue working from home, right? And what does that mean is that digital transactions will increase as people are at home. It also means that just the sheer footprint, the security footprint is actually increased by so much, right? That's what I feel.
Yes, I agree, Mohit, and these are some valid points here. And I want to also ask you, we are seeing India is in the process, in the midst of massive digital revolution, and more people are being brought into the digital fold as we are speaking as well. What are the key considerations or safety features one needs to keep in mind while conducting digital transactions?
I think as always, right, you need to keep your personal information secure. And this is not necessarily only with regard to digital transactions, but when you allow exposure to your personal data, you definitely make it easier for somebody to actually uh, engage in fraudulent practices, right? So the first thing I would say is, even before you get into digital transactions, is keep your own personal data secure. There have been cases around the world when people go for welfare benefits, which includes things like pensions or social security, and they find that somebody has already claimed that, right? And in India, we're lucky in that we've had a few great initiatives. Aadhaar is one, which is a biometric identity linked to each individual, which actually helps you in ensuring that that individual is the right person. So the first thing I would suggest is keep your personal data secure and keep tracking that personal data. The second thing I would also like to just advise is that something like a credit score. Actually, if you actually would go into a detailed uh, credit report, you would also be aware of what all has been opened in your name. Now, in all probability, all of them should be yours. But the chances of somebody else exploiting something can also be detected from that particular report, right? In case there is a loan which you have not taken and there is some it's out there, or there's a credit card in some shape or form. So you would be aware of that. So the first thing is be aware of where your data is being used. Make sure that you reduce your footprint on that. Now coming on to a classic transaction, right? Uh, Do not share your passwords with anyone. And this happens more than you would think. In many cases, here, a scammer is actually working on human nature, right? And human beings, at a point, especially at a time of crisis, will be much more willing to actually, we don't think, we stop thinking at a point of crisis, right? So there is a panic situation, your account is going to be shut down, please share this with us, and you are more likely to do so. The same thing you would not do in a different environment. A standard story is uh, car thefts. Somebody say, oh, you dropped money outside. So now they are playing on greed. So it's either greed or it's fear. For example, think about it. You will also often hear these stories that somebody will come up to a car, parked car, and say one of two things. Oh, your tire is flat. The person will get out of the car, open the car, and get out. And somebody will, take your laptop bag and run away. The second thing is greed. Oh, you dropped some money outside, or your friend dropped money outside. Is that yours? Even if the person knows that they have not dropped any money, they'll still open the door and check because money is this is greed now, right? Fear or greed. So you have to be very careful that when you are going digital, you don't fall prey to either fear or greed. And those two stimuli don't actually cause you to change your behavior and actually expose personal information first, expose OTPs, passwords, anything like that. The third is going to something which is fundamentally unsecure, right? And this includes things like, in many cases, public Wi Fi may not be as secure as a private Wi Fi network. Even when you are, for example, often enough, many of us over the course of our years have been to a, shall we say, a place where you can access an internet cafe, for example, right? Whether it's here or when you're traveling. On that internet cafe, if you're just browsing the internet, it's one thing. But if you're going to log into your bank account and make transactions, possibly that's a bit unsafe, right? You don't know what's actually on that device. Uh, there are malicious software which could be loaded onto a computer, which actually it basically logs what keystrokes you're entering, right? So people will know pretty much which key you have entered. So everything exists out there, and it's only by sort of reducing your own exposure to places like that that you'll actually be able to. On apps ask for personal information. Apps basically ask for permissions all the time. Do you actually bother to check what permissions you're granting? I think most of us don't, right? And you'll be surprised that the sheer amount of data which when you people give permission to be scammed in almost all cases, right? And that's the unfortunate part of it. So what I would suggest is be aware of what can go wrong. When you're actually aware of what can go wrong, the probability of you being able to sort of actually come in there and save yourself is so much higher, right? So links when they come in, and I think in most companies, or you would get all these training sessions about looking at where did the email originate from. Is there something which indicates that this is not similar in pattern to what had come in the past? So it will feel like a bank site or something like that. Also think about it, like your earlier question on what has changed in COVID. What has changed in COVID is more people are working remotely. More
Hmm.
work will happen remotely through emails, and therefore you are much more likely to be, to go and do something like that. There's so many other things. If you are donating to a charity online, have you actually bothered to check whether that charity is genuine or not? And I think all of these things happen continuously. So it is estimated that about 120 million Indians last year were victims of some form of cybercrime, right? And when you think about it, of the number of Indians who are digital today, that 120 million is a very, very high number. And that
Yep.
means that almost all of us, without even realizing it over the last 2 or 3 years, would have fallen victim without even knowing about it, right? Somebody's accessed an email or tried to access an email of yours. Uh, Social media is, again, most people nowadays, younger people in particular, have multiple social media accounts, right? And you may be logged in through multiple devices in multiple places, and that's just another place where you are vulnerable. In the US in particular, what was seen was that even something as commonplace today, I say a dating app can be misused in ways to actually gain personal information and therefore be used to commit financial crime. Right. So, on as long as you're safe, as long as you're you're thinking security, chances are you'll avoid the worst of it. But be aware that sometimes it's not a question. It's not when you're doing a bank transaction or you're only doing a digital payment. It is in your normal life when you're not doing any of these that you're most vulnerable.
Absolutely, Mohit. And I think the key is that we need to keep our personal data secure, as you mentioned, need to continuously track it and do not be lax in any, whenever you have to be like aware and on your guards all the time just to keep your data secure and yourself secure for any kind of phishing attack or anything like that. Yes. I want to ask you, India, we are seeing it is in the forefront of digital payments, and UPI is one such example. What are the other payment methods and trends which are emerging and which you can foresee?
Sure. So I think I'll give a lot of credit to both the RBI, the Indian government, as well as to industry, and lastly to the Indian consumer. Uh, because of all these, because of a very progressive environment, because of tech change, which is really rapid, and because consumers are willing to try and adopt new modes of payments and transactions, we've actually seen some of the fastest growth in digital payments in the world. India actually has more digital transactions take place than any other country, and this was not the case even as of 5 years back.
Yeah.
From the perspective of what is changing, I think what is happening is that especially younger generation is much more willing to do digital transactions. Right, that's the first thing which has changed, and that's where the volume comes in from. And from modes, you of course spoke about UPI, and the success of UPI has been incredible. We've also seen a great growth in RuPay transactions, especially RuPay debit card transactions, which is again very interesting. Other things which are increasing are, of course, affordability transactions, which include EMIs in different shapes and form, buy now, pay later to a lesser extent. But what we also see is what I would call consolidated view, wherein customers are much more willing to go into a single bank where the digital banking application really, right, allows them much more flexibility. So the rise of digital banking. So a customer is willing to use their digital bank for much more than they would do traditional banking. So you can actually book loans online. You can go get a fixed deposit online. Earlier, when people would have gone into a bank branch to do all of this can happen through their app. So great success by most of the leading banks here. Similarly, the growth of what I would call consumer tech players such as the Google Pays, Phone Pays, Paytms, and all of the world. Again, a lot of growth has happened on that side, right? So UPI. And I would say that again, we're also going to be very soon seeing a resurgence in the wallet business as well. The RBI has come up with great policies on what is on the PPI front, and I think that's also going to be used. And so what we are seeing is that on every wherever you can think about it, we are seeing this increase in digital payments. Next year onwards, and maybe in a couple of years, we'll also see as the RBI has gone with CBDC, which is the central bank digital currency. I think we can also see some growth there as well because that's again something which is so interesting. E-rupee had been launched, and that also worked to a certain extent. But I think the central bank digital currency will really take it to the next level in many ways.
That's right. I think the whole idea is that how we can leverage the technology such as blockchain, etc., to elevate the space in the digital payments and in the ecosystem overall. I wanted to talk about some of the offerings that PayU has in payments or a credit or in fintech space. If you want to talk about that, Mohit.
Sure. So I think when people think of PayU, everybody really thinks of a payment gateway aggregator, and as in this credit card, debit card, net banking transactions, etc., etc. But PayU is a lot wider than that. And from a PayU payments perspective, I think we keep Wibmo, or rather Endstage, is really one of the most interesting offerings which we have because, and it's especially relevant this week because we are talking about financial literacy. Because when you think about what Wibmo's core is, Wibmo works with banks on two fronts. One is on the authentication of a transaction, which is providing additional factor of authentication, which is the ACS business, and the second part of it is working with banks on risk engines largely, right? So we're talking about something which is so central this particular and so topical for this week. As what Wipmo has really got is that ability to create risk engines and the ability to actually help mitigate financial risk for end customers through its ACS platform. So I think that's one of the things which we never think about when you talk payments, but so much of what PayU does is actually related to security and trying to ensure that transactions are more secure and consumers are more secure. This coming year, we are also going to see 3DS 2.0 come into play, and that is again going to increase payment security significantly, right? Uh, right now, in the month of June end, we are also going to start off with tokenization.
Yes.
Tokenization actually helps us in ensuring that card data is, and that is again, see, personal information, card data is actually secured in the best possible form, right? And that will mean that an individual's card details are not accessible all over the place. It's going to be so. It's such a change when you think about it. If you go back to the last 4 5 years, every year you would read a report about X million card data exposed, or X so many million customers had their personal data out there. And I think it's a great step by the RBI to push for tokenization across the entire industry. And I think with tokenization, with 3DS 2.0, India possibly may have the most secure environment for digital payments, right? So I think we are actually leading in many many ways. On the
Hmm.
other hand, we also have to be aware that one of the reasons why in fact, the tagline which you mentioned right up front, what the RBI had said, go digital, go secure, right? As a country, we want to digitize because we feel that financial literacy combined with a digitized population is perhaps the fastest way for India to actually scale our growth, right? So it's got a great socio-economic benefit to going digital. On the other hand, as human beings go digital, it's the chances of fraud happening keep increasing because you will have a young population, first new to digital people, and also the older generation, which may not be that tech savvy, all who are going digital at the same time. And therefore, we have actually increased the footprint of people who could be targeted by scamsters, right? So both things are going to happen simultaneously. So there is a benefit to it, but there's also a risk to individuals. And therefore, this framework which the RBI is creating to actually increase digital security, this is the right time to do it because I personally feel that over the next 3 to 5 years, digital payments might increase another 5 to 10x, right? 5 to 10x of what they are today. So
Yes.
the infrastructure needs to be ready to actually have that kind of growth, and the framework needs to be there. Because think about it. If somebody goes digital for the first time and actually suffers identity theft, cybercrime, or financial loss in some shape or form, that person is going to go back and say, no, this is not worth it, right? Let me go back to the old way of doing it. And we don't want that to happen. We want people to go digital, to transact digitally in a secure manner. So we also want to ensure that it's good for business as well. So the investments which companies make on security is not a cost. It's actually an investment for the future, right? You'll actually end up doing better because of that. So I think that's what I see is going to happen over the next year at least. And sets the sort of foundation for the next 4 5 years, decade perhaps.
Yes, and on behalf of PayU, I am really backing up for tokenization and 3DS too, which will go a long way, in ensuring that we are in the safe and secure space, especially when we are providing the payment services and other fintech services. However, on the other side, by the sheer country size of India, the staggering country size, and when only about half or 50% of the population is covered under internet, we still have so much of scale to achieve in terms of 40 to 50, 40 to 45% of people are still not under internet concentration. So we have so much of scale still to achieve, and I think, and that's how where the whole idea of financial inclusion comes into play. And we know internally within PayU, we are driving a lot of initiatives for financial inclusion. So I just want you to talk about what are the aggregators like us, like PayU, how important it is for us to push for financial inclusion, and how is PayU driving financial inclusion?
So two things, right? As fintech companies, this is in general or PayU in particular,
Yeah,
what we are trying to do is we are trying to create the infrastructure, the
yeah,
pipes, which act. Or think of it in a different era, we would be the people who are creating the railroad, the railway tracks, or the ports or the roads. Today, all of that has changed, and it's no longer physical infrastructure; it is digital infrastructure. So companies like ours, we create the digital infrastructure which enables transactions to happen. So the pipes, if I may say so, right? Now, and that is what we need to do to ensure that these pipes are both fast, as in transactions can take place as fast as possible, they are secure, and they are simple. Sometimes we forget that the simplicity is super important. Human beings will always gravitate towards something which is easy to do. And therefore, we need to ensure that everything works as simply as possible. One of the greatest successes of UPI has been that it was so simple for an end customer.
Yep.
What happened at the back end was not as important as what the customer could see, a phone number or a VPA, and you could complete a transaction with minimum steps, right? And when we think about simplicity and when we think about scalability, we often enough ignore security, right? And that's the other S which is so important out of these three.
Yep.
And I think that's what the RBI is right now trying to stress is that as we scale, as we make it easier for customers, let's also ensure that security is really there. Now, financial inclusion is one part of it because we are bringing in, think about it, 20 years ago most of us may not even have ever transacted digitally. Today all of us transact digitally, or many of us do. And then over the next 20 years, the remaining population which you mentioned, Richa, today, who's either not digital because of lack of infrastructure, which could be internet, or lack of devices,
Yep.
also possibly be there. Because over the last 5 years at PayU itself, I've seen that initially most transactions were from what we would call uh, computers, desktop devices, right? Now, today, when we think about it, most transactions come in from mobile phones, whether it
Yeah.
is through an app or whether it's through an MWeb sort of flow, right? Where you're going to a website without an app, right? But that's where most transactions are coming in from there. And earlier, what we'd also seen was for higher value transactions, people preferred to use their desktops and they would only use mobile phones for lower value transactions. But today, that's not the case anymore. Today, we actually see pretty much uniformity in how people use their mobile devices. And of course, on a mobile device, you have to take extra precautions as compared to a desktop because first of all, you may not be on your home Wi-Fi, you may be on a different Wi-Fi network, so that straight away changes the your environment. It could also be that the site which you're taking on a small device, you may not even be sure that the link which you've gone to or the page you've gone to is the correct one. Right? On a desktop computer, it's easier to see the entire page, to know any changes. But on a small phone, sometimes, and for those of us whose eyesight is a bit off, maybe sometimes we can't read the fonts too well. And which is why the elderly get targeted at a disproportionate rate because they may not be familiar with it. And it does happen, right? So we have to be careful about it. The second thing which I would say is that financial inclusion is not just a question of infrastructure and pipes. It's also important to ensure financial literacy along with financial inclusion.
Hmm.
You don't want somebody to only have the ability to do something, but without having the knowledge to actually protect themselves, right? And when I think about financial literacy, and this is true for me as well, it's important to have a budget, and a budget is not about saving money. It's not like it's not a bad word like a diet is, right? It's about what is it. Much like in a diet, the best diets that work are where they actually encourage you to eat what you want but in moderation. It's about, all right, you can have cheat days, you can go out and do what you want, but this is also about discipline, right? And a budget is fundamentally about discipline. You want to spend money, great, but now let's figure out where that money is going to come from. And it's also important to ensure that you always have savings at hand, right? So, and in save when it comes to savings, in spite of all the knowledge which we have, almost everybody tries concentrating savings, right? You'll have most of it in either stock or mutual funds, or in my case, I'm really bad at it. I have far too many savings accounts which have got which have not and I'm, even fixed deposits are better than that. So I think all of us, we think we know what you're doing, but the heart of savings is actually to diversify, save in as many things as you can, right? So that's the thing. You don't put all your eggs in one basket, as simple as that. The other thing which I would say when it comes to just financial literacy is, and most important, is actually securing yourself. What
Hmm.
is the point of locking, think about it, if there is a safe, what is the point of locking a safe, of having a safe and not locking it?
Hmm.
Many
Correct.
things in houses happen because somebody has forgotten to lock the door or shut a window, right? It's as you take more and more precautions, you make it harder for somebody to target you. This does not prevent a criminal out there, right? It just means that the criminal is less likely to target you, which will lead me to the next piece. if you have ever suffered a cybercrime, or if you have ever felt that that somebody tried to steal your identity, or then you should actually then go out and try to close the loop, which means inform others,
Hmm.
spread then spread what actually happened to you, and then also go to the authorities. That's fundamentally their job as well, right? So I think that's what I would say here.
Absolutely, Mohit, and thank you for those valuable insights and basic your do's and don'ts about practicing the cyber hygiene. All I want to say is, while we are moving towards a safe, secure, convenient ecosystem, digital payments ecosystem, which is just getting larger and larger as the time is going by, we need to practice basic cyber hygiene. I think that should do the trick. That should uh, get us home. We need to ensure the security of card details. We need to avoid spam, fraudulent emails, and the basic cyber hygiene, as you had mentioned in our discussion. So, thank you, Mohit, for these valuable insights, and hope our audience abide by that and learn from that and take the basic awareness on that. Thank you, Mohit. Thank
Sure.
you. Have a good day.
Pleasure.